Okay, I'm going to open council time for Wednesday, May the 19th. We will begin with old business and approve the minutes of our May 12th meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the last meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, moving on to vacant buildable lands. We have a presentation by Oliver, Jose, and Bob Poole. Thank you. Take it away.
Good morning, Madam Chair and councillors. And if I may, this is Oliver Ojako. With your indulgence, councillors, let me just make a very quick opening remarks. And the first is to thank the entire council for directing staff to run three different versions of the vacant buildable lands model. And that is why we are here today, to present the results to you. We are not going to be asking you to pick any model or pick any version. At the end of the presentation, what staff is going to be asking the council is to go to a public hearing. And at that public hearing is where you're going to consider the recommendations of the project advisory group and any other inputs that comes as part of that public hearing. So that is really what we are going to be asking for at the end of the our conversation and presentation with council. Again, we are not asking you to pick any model. We are just asking you, after the presentation and questions that you may have of staff, are you ready for us to go to a hearing? The earliest we can have a hearing with council will be June 15th. So, and as questions come up, I will tell you why I'm asking that June 15th be the hearing on this item. So with that, as I indicated, thank you for giving us the opportunity to run the three different models, which Bob Poole will be presenting. The first version was based on the existing assumptions as of 2016. The second version is the project advisory committee and project team recommendations. And then the third version is based on the development industry group's input. So those are the three scenarios that Bob will be going over this morning with you, and then we will be here to answer questions. So with that, let me turn it over to Bob. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Oliver. As Oliver suggested, I've been asked to run three different versions of the model. So I'm going to kind of go through those models and compare the results through a series of charts. Next slide, please. And these changes to the model really just impact the residential yield. There are some side impacts on the commercial side based on mixed use, but really it's looking at different infrastructure and open space deductions. Next slide. So these are the three models that we looked at. Version 1, we're calling is the 2016 adopted version of the model. That's the 2020 baseline. So that's running the 2016 model for the 2020 year. And the 2016 model is kind of the run of the model and the existing UGA boundaries combined. Version 2 is the 2020 PAC project, which is the proposal from the Public Advisory Committee with the project team filling in for some of the areas that weren't resolved by the team. And I'll walk through what those are. It says that the residential infrastructure is 31.5%, up from 27% in the baseline model. There's also, the model goes into a lot to look at all the development that's happened in Vancouver City Center. And we changed the city center, was moved to a mixed use classification that was 70% jobs and 30% houses. It used to be 100% jobs. We also said that 5% of the land in city center will redevelop from whatever it is into more housing units. They also said that in Vancouver, commercial, what used to be 100% jobs will switch to 85% jobs and 15% houses as a mixed use classification. And 1% of the land will redevelop into more houses than it currently has. Then the developer community, the BIA/developers community recommendation is the third model, and we call that the 2020 BIA just as a reference. It is a bigger group than just the BIA. The residential infrastructure for those guys is 54.7%. And how they arrived at that was they asked that we increase the infrastructure from 31.5 to 34%. They also asked that off-site infrastructure, which is schools and parks, be added to the model. And they said that's 20.7% of all residential land. So this is a change from the PAC model and the existing baseline model where the off-site infrastructure is determined at the beginning of the plan. We contact the cities and the schools to get their capital facilities plans and take that into consideration when sizing the UGA, how big it should be, and it should accommodate the needs of the schools and parks. And that's a change from the developers who are asking that the infrastructure be applied as just a percent of the vacant residential land. And they have said that we should use the capital facilities plans to help us understand what that ratio is. At this point, they are saying that they think they've arrived at the 20.7% of the residential land will convert to schools and parks. They also say that in Ridgefield, there's extra open space requirements, and they ask that we add another 12.5 deduction to low density residential land because it's getting converted into open space.
Bob,
yes.
May I interrupt you just for a second to go back? Because each one of these you have mentioned the previous percentage. So with the offsite infrastructure for schools and parks, they're asking for a 20.7%. Was there zero applied before?
In the prior plan, the 2016 plan, we asked the schools and parks to submit a capital facilities plan, and that was taken into consideration.
So there was no specific percentage applied for that?
Correct.
Okay.
I think in version 2, the PAC proposal is that it stays on the demand side, but we do make it more clear how much was taken out, will be taken out.
Okay. And then the other one is the Ridgefield. That was not accounted for at all. So it would have been 0%, and they're asking 12.5.
Additional. In the prior proposal, it was 31.5 for infrastructure.
Yeah, okay. And so, so this is adding the 12.5 additional for Ridgefield area because of the open space they require.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Sorry, Madam Chair. So
Yes,
on the offsite infrastructure, so previously schools and parks were accounted for on the demand side based on capital facilities plans. Is that what I understand you to say?
Correct. That was considered in the 2016 plan. They were asked to submit their capital facilities plans and it was considered.
Okay. And so go ahead.
The project going forward is to continue that process.
Okay. So do we know, and maybe we haven't done this calculation in the past plan or the last plan, do we know about what that percentage was as we look back? If we looked at what amount of acres we accounted for in terms of schools and parks, was it near this 20%, or have we done that math or calculation?
It was considered. It's not clear exactly how much where that played into it. I don't know, Jose, if you want to clarify that.
And so how, with regard to this one in particular, I'm thinking about how we manage this going forward, since we don't have updated capital facilities plans from our schools right now. We're going with the existing schools and parks. I think it's been counted. I'm just curious as to how we are accounting for that to make sure we don't count it twice.
I think the choices here are, one, it can be accounted for on the demand side. And I think this is looking forward at our next plan. We can either, the PAC set group says, let's do it on the demand side. and included in the total acres. And then the BIA position is that it should be on the supply side and be a percentage of all residential land. I think the idea is, and I'm not the best person to talk about this, is that, but the schools are experts in this, and their capital facilities plans they're a little more creative than just saying a direct percentage. So for example, Vancouver just added to VSAA, they're building an elementary school on existing land in downtown. So they have existing vacant land out there. So their capital facilities plan would identify the gap, and we would want to include that in the demand side. Does that cover that well, Jose or Oliver?
I think you did, Bob. And if I may, councillors, one of the things that we do is that, and Bob will chime in on this, is that existing undeveloped parkland and existing undeveloped school land are deducted from the beginning before we can show what is available for development. So that is something that a clarification we have to provide to council. Secondly, every time we are going through the general plan update, the school districts are at the table and they tell us what property that they want to be brought into the UGB, where their needs are. And each time they present that, we work with them to make sure that any land that they want to be, they have or own, they want to come into the urban growth boundary, that we include it in the urban growth boundary. The last, in 2016, only one school district asked that the land that they have purchased and want to build elementary school on be brought into the urban growth boundary, and that was the city of the La Center School District, and our council honored that. So that is the only thing I want to add in the conversation regarding school. And finally, the development industry group acknowledge that we should verify this number by looking at the school district CFP and PAC CFP. I want to give them credit for that. And you will agree that the school districts have been having difficulty updating their capital facilities plan due to the COVID. And they've asked you for an extension, which you granted, and they may be asking you for another extension. So we don't have any way yet until we review the submitted capital facilities plan to tell you what the number should be. I just want to put that out there because that's the fact.
And if I could interject, I believe that because the past have, when we consider population and schools, et cetera, it would seem to me that we could extrapolate some numbers based upon the past. And it's my understanding that this group is sort of, considering it from that point of view, is that you can look at past population increases and schools that were built or capital facility plans that came about. So it's not totally exact, and this is a planning tool. And therefore, I would say that it doesn't have to be exact and that we can extrapolate from past population / school enrollment type things, even though the schools are now asking actually to put off a year for their capital facilities plan. I don't know if you have any further comment to make on that. Oliver's spoken and okay.
I don't, Councillor. No, I don't.
All right, thank you. Moving on.
I have another question about this.
Okay, Councillor.
I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about what the difference of impact is between accounting for schools and parks on the supply side versus the demand side. Is there any difference in how this ends up calculating land, or what is the impact of that? And then I also noticed that Jose was sort of almost opening his mouth a couple of times. So if there's anything else to add, please do.
I'll let Oliver talk about that. I have nothing else on that at this point.
I think that the way that this is being presented, I would say one that yes, is true that we can extrapolate based on population and student ratios and so forth. On the other hand, for the purposes of this, remember that we already sized the urban growth boundary. So we are looking back based on the 2016 urban growth boundaries that have already been sized. So applying this is a subtraction, it's a deduction from the land that is already in the UGB. Now, you can look at it and infer, well, did the school tell you that they need additional land or not? Because you then have to look at their capital facilities plan. Because going forward, we can be able to say, okay, we have new population that we are planning for, and the school district can also do their own forecast or base their own forecast on the population that the county is planning for, and then be able to estimate housing units and students coming from those housing units, and then be able to give us an idea of how much land or whether they need elementary school or whatever, and how much that land is. Then when we are sizing and planning for that new population, we can then use that new information to size the urban growth boundary properly. In this case, you have already sized the urban growth boundary. So if you were to apply this, you are deducting this land from the existing urban growth boundary. And two, as I indicated earlier, this is more of a clarification. It is important to also understand that existing undeveloped school sites and undeveloped parks have already been deducted. We don't include them as being available for development. So that's how to clearly understand this. And I hope that I'm explaining it and answering your question.
So may I just ask just to follow up right there, if you wouldn't mind, Councillor Lance, if you had something else to say, but I just wanted to clarify, because that undeveloped land by schools is already considered. So the school that Lecenter asked to expand it, Vancouver schools then used vacant land that they already had that was already accounted for. Is that correct?
Yes, they were building on
For
existing site. Yes, existing
Okay.
site that they already own. And typically that's sometimes what the school district do when there is influx of students in their school district or any particular school. The first thing they do is they resort to portables. And then until such a time when they are able to build brick and mortar, and if they have an existing school site, with the passage of the bond or whatever, that's when they start to build a school. And what I was saying earlier is that because the school district are sitting at the table as part of our planning partners, they tell us what they need, and we try to include that in the sizing of the new urban growth boundary.
Yeah, that I did understand that. I just wanted to clarify that one little thing about using what schools already have, like Vancouver did in the case of adding that elementary school. So anyway, did that answer your question, Councillor Lance, or did you want to follow up?
Yes, it did. And so I kind of want to paraphrase it back and see if I understand it. So basically, what's being recommended is that when we are applying this model to our to the county as our boundaries currently exist, this recommendation is asking that we further reduce for infrastructure this 20.7% to just say we think that's what schools would need of land already within our boundary. But what I'm understanding is that the way it has typically gone is we would run the model and schools would provide input about what they see their future needs to be. And that's the demand side, where we would come in after the fact and say, okay, we might adjust this way and that way to meet the needs that the schools are saying for additional land, as opposed to the land that already exists within the boundaries. So it's sort of taking away from what we already have, as opposed to thinking about what else we might need, is sort of how I'm interpreting that.
I will say that that's correct, and Bob and Jose will likely chime in, but my answer to you in the short answer is yes. It is deducting from the land that are already available, that are currently, we are saying is available within the existing urban growth boundary that was sized in 2016, because that's all we have now.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I think maybe
Councilor Baum.
I think maybe I should direct this question to Bob. Excuse me. Councilor Lentz just mentioned that 20.7% or over 20% would be deducted on the supply side for schools. I believe that number is 7.9%. Is that what you used in the version 3? The 7.9% for schools?
Bob, you're muted.
If you're muted, you can answer this, because this 20.7 are a combination of school and parks. You can differentiate what is the percentage for school and what is the percentage of parks. It's just showing up as 20.7, but it is a combination of parks and school. So there is a number for school and a number for parks. This is total.
My
Yes,
understanding is that parks was 12.8%.
correct. And,
Yes.
and schools is 7.9%.
Yes.
So it's a little bit different than Councilor Lentz, what you were understanding it to be. It's a much smaller number for just the schools.
Councilor Bauman, just to interject there, I was putting them together. So schools and parks, both, we're talking, it's the same thing. 20.7 together, it's schools and parks. Previously, we'd done it on the demand side. Now they're talking about taking that out on the front side from land we already have. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did not hear you say that you were combining schools and parks. It is in the version, I believe, but I didn't hear it in what you had stated. Bob, could you show us specifically where that 7.9% is removed when it's on the demand side in version 2?
So we are talking about really putting together how we want to do our next comprehensive plan process. And so we're kind of in a weird spot where we have the existing comprehensive plan from 2016. When we say, let's do the new comprehensive plan, we will have the choice of, do we want to do schools and parks on the demand side or the supply side? So right now we're in the state of, we have done it on the demand side. The BIA suggested they want to do it on the supply side. So as we come into the new comprehensive plan, we would make that decision, either do it one way or the other.
So is it, as was stated earlier, that it's not clear in version 2 what the percentage was that was used?
So version 2, really, that's the 2016 baseline you're talking about. What was taken out of the 2016, right? The
No,
baseline,
version
because
2 being the PAC recommendation.
right.
Mhm.
So version 2 says that the land for schools and parks will be based on the capital facilities plan on the demand side when you do the comprehensive plan. So it really hasn't.
So it is unaccounted, excuse me, I'm sorry for interrupting, but so it's
switch that to-
unaccounted for in
So-
version 2?
No, that's not true. So the existing urban growth boundary was sized based on input from schools and parks. So the existing UGA is supposed to have enough land for the schools and parks. And since we're running inside that UGA, the assumption is the land is already accounted for in there. Right? But
So
really what
there's
we're
no
talking about
additional
is moving
percent.
forward, right? Moving forward, when we do the comprehensive plan process, we have to talk, how are we gonna do that to address schools and parks going forward? Do we want to do it on the demand side? Is the UGA big enough? Or do we want to do it on the supply side and say, we're always gonna subtract this amount out of our residential land for schools and parks? And you get it to a point right now where you're kind of saying, every time we do a comprehensive plan, we're gonna talk with schools and parks and see what they think their needs are. And the other one is we're gonna kind of settle in on a percentage here, and we're probably gonna live with that ongoing. Or we could open that up every time we do a comprehensive plan to say, well, this is how we got to our final number in version 3 for the comprehensive plan, and we'll repeat that every time we do a comprehensive plan process.
Madam Chair. Just one last clarifying question so just for me, for the ability for me to kind of understand this process. So the BBLM is really counting what we currently have and what land we have available, given whatever models we're running. And as we look at sizing the urban growth boundary, that's when we look at population growth, needs of schools and parks historically, and how we size the urban growth boundary going forward. Am I on the right track there? What we have right now versus what we need in the future?
So the goal is, right, we say we need to accommodate 100,000 people. Do we have room in the urban growth boundary to do that?
Right.
The vacant lands model says, guess what? You only have room for 95,000.
Right.
So you
Okay.
go, oh, we need to make the boundary bigger. Let's make the boundary bigger. What's the
Right.
model say now? And we kind of iterate through that till we make the UGA big enough to accommodate all the
And then I
growth that we
guess
want.
and we don't have to answer this now, but I mean, the question I would have is how we transition this parks and schools question to that we already know that we've accounted for schools and parks inside the current urban growth boundary. We've already counted those parcels and have historically added those later on the demand side, working with capital facilities plans. How we transition from where we are now and how we've done it historically to potentially looking at it from the supply side. That's the part that I think we need to figure out how we do that, if that's something that we want to do.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking that probably is a policy choice to decide whether we do this on the demand side or the supply side. And what we're being told by people who do this on the ground on a daily basis is that it should be on the supply side. So
Yeah, and I don't have any argument to that per se. I just want to make sure that if and when we do make that policy decision and we transition to that process, that we're careful about making sure we don't double count land, and we do that as cleanly as possible, if that's what we choose to do.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Bob. Continue on.
Okay, thank you. So the third item was looking at what's going on into downtown Vancouver and Vancouver commercial. And as I said, version 2 recommends switching those to mixed use classifications to recognize the amount of apartments and condos that are being built in city center and commercial. The BIA developer's position is that the waterfront and a lot of the development happening in downtown Vancouver is pretty much kind of wrapping up. It was a one-time deal. We're kind of wrapping up the waterfront stuff, that there isn't that kind of capacity remaining. So they recommended that we don't do that. And so they.
And that recommendation came from the developer lobby, contrary to request and guidance from the city of Vancouver itself based on their plans, is my understanding as well.
Right, the
And
city
that
of
even
Vancouver would like to see higher numbers there.
and even the version 2 is lower. That 85-15 and 1% is still lower and more conservative than what Vancouver projects for its future development in its plans.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct, and that is the recommendation, if I may. Yes, that is correct, and there are so many other projects that are in the pipeline that the city have identified to us. And you are correct that what is in version 2 is more conservative than what the city was letting us know, including stuff that are already in the pipeline that is not yet accounted for. You're correct.
So with that,
Okay.
we can kind of, sorry. Other questions? Okay, let's move on to see what the different models show. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So for each one of the slides, I'm going to present them 2 slides. One of them will look at acres and one of them will look at actual housing units. And so this first slide looks at the 3 different models and the total capacity, residential capacity in terms of net buildable acres. And you can see that the 2020 baseline, for example, has 6,600 acres of vacant residential land. The PAC proposal increased that to 7,200 acres. And then the third version, the BIA, is just under 5,000 acres of buildable land. Next slide, please. So this next slide takes that same information and converts it to houses. So that's applying the density based on the land use types. And we can see that the baseline model showed that we had about 45,000 housing units of capacity. The PAC project team says there's probably more like 55,000 housing units available. And then the BIA version says there's about 36,000 housing units, additional housing capacity out there. That's kind of the range of the options. Next slide, please. We slice and dice this all sorts of different ways. This way of looking at it looks at it by the city and the UGA. And what this shows is, again, we're back to acres, that the Vancouver UGA has the vast majority of the total acreages in all 3 models. It's about half. And that's the dark purple. And you can see the city of Vancouver acreages. Next slide, please. This is an interesting slide here that we've switched that same view, but now we're looking at housing units. And you can see that the city, the light blue Vancouver, which is the city limits, has really increased in the middle selection. And that's due to that, all the high density and the different densities that we have, which are higher densities, and all that downtown development. I think, yeah. Next slide, please. This next slide looks at the same data, but breaks it down by the VBLM land uses, which are generalized comprehensive plan designations. And in these models, this one, we can see how the PAC version of the model changes quite a bit from the baseline model in terms of, you see there's a lot more categories with acreages, and that's where we've picked up the redevelopment on high density residential, the green ones. We've picked up the redevelopment in city center. We've added the vacant platted land, which I really like. And we've also added the Vancouver higher density stuff. One of the things we've added that's really cool, this model, is the vacant platted lots. And before, those used to kind of just drop out of the model, but now we know they're in the pipeline and we know exactly how many housing units there are in there. So it's a very good addition. Next slide, please. Again, this takes that same acreage data and multiplies it by our new densities. I should say the densities are different from the baseline model where we move to actual densities. So we can see how that, again, impacts the outcome, really impacts the residential high density. You can also see the vacant platted lots here. There's 2,700 lots in development in the process. In the old model, those used to drop out because they're less than 5,000 square feet. And now we know exactly how many houses will be going in on those. So that's very good. Next slide, please. So that kind of wraps up the impacts to those changes on the county level. Then the next one was what's the impact of that change in Ridgefield? And this just shows the total model acreages again. And you can see no changes in the first two. On the third one, the BIA one, I actually show the total number of acres that would be there without the 12.5 for Ridgefield. And you can see they have 694 acres of buildable land. And with that 12.5 deduction, they dropped to 634 acres of developable land. Next slide, please. And when we switch that view to a housing view, we can see that the 12.5% equates to 300 houses out of 4,300. Next slide, please. This slide shows Ridgefield in the three models by the VBLM land use type. To give you a comparison, and you can see those houses come out of the low density. Next slide, please. And this shows the same information by housing units. Next slide, please. I think that's the end, and it is. It's a lot of data and numbers. I know it's a lot to digest.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just still curious about this parks and schools question. And I'm wondering if there's any interest. I would be curious, but I don't want to add extra work to see the model with that 20.7% not deducted from the existing, just to see what that model looks like. And I don't remember what were they asking for in terms of infrastructure deduction? Not
Can we
counting
go back
parks
to
and-
slide 3, please?
34. Okay, so yeah, I would support that 34. And I think we can do that with stormwater unknowns in the future. But anyway, I'm just curious about what that would look like if we consider transitioning to putting that on the demand side. I don't want to make sure we don't double count parcels, but what that would look like if we ran it at 34% and counted the existing parcels as they exist today.
If I may, councillors, and Bob, I don't want to put more work on your plate, but in response, that could be done, councillors. Bob, that is doable, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it will be 34% for infrastructure on rerunning model 3 with 34% and holding off on the 27.7, which the council could direct us to account for that when we size the urban growth boundary. But yes, the 34% infrastructure could be run, and Bob can present that maybe at your hearing, just something for you to see, whatever direction you give us.
If he can get it to us before the hearing, that would be preferable. And I'm sorry, Bob, if it creates too much additional work, but I think we should see it before the hearing. And maybe
Okay.
have it, give it at least that particular graph so that we have time to digest that and ask further clarification, rather than have this come at the hearing on the 15th.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry,
Can I-
councillor. We can certainly do so.
I just need to clarify the request. So you're wanting to see version 3 with the 34% reduction with the 20% removed?
Yes.
And so with this,
Right? Isn't that right, Counselor Quiring? So the 34%, but with the 20.7 removed, just because that's, just so we have an idea of what that actually is. I
okay,
just think it would be another tool in how we,
okay.
Just a comment. If the interest is in trying to see whether or not one of the models has double counted, that's one thing. But if we're trying to look at it in terms of what are the results, just a reminder that we don't choose a model based on its results. We choose the model based on what we know to be the correct inputs. So from a policy point of view, if it's double counted in some way, certainly to know that would be important as an input, but not so much as an output.
yeah,
To
yeah,
look
I
at it in-
agree with you.
Yeah, it starts to sway one's reasoning, doesn't it? And really, we're trying to be sure that for the county, we're using the correct inputs for it, for the model.
Yeah, I think the purpose of my request would be just if we're considering a transition to supply side versus demand side, that we have a better idea of what that data point is. Not that we would look for the best results and then choose which one we like best.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it is important to see the result. However, this would be a change, so we will expect there will be a different result. And, you know, it is altogether possible, in my thinking, really, the supply side is an important thing to consider. Do we have enough? Is the question. Do we have enough? If we don't consider it, you know, what are we left with? Are we going to be? And the other, I would just say, just all around this whole model is it affects a lot. It affects a lot of our planning. So I think that we need to get it as correct as we possibly can. And hopefully the result will be a benefit to Clark County in the sense that housing costs will not be so exponentially high. That's, you know, when you have a false scarcity of land because we have not moved any line, because we say we have more land to build on. One thing, by the way, that reminds me, the one thing that was mentioned last night when we had public comment from the BIA, the government affairs person for the BIA, was one of the last things on the letter that was asked to be considered. And that is the land that really, it appears to be developable, but it actually is not developable because it's in there. Developers go out there, pencil it, and it proves not to be. And therefore, there has to be some way, or there should be some way that we create to enable us to know that that is no longer developable, but it keeps getting put in there because it is vacant and we think it's developable. But they had suggested something like the FEMA model, you know, where a developer can come and say, let's, you know, and present that to the staff. So, but, you know, that's something different than actually putting it into the model. It is something to consider for the future. Oliver, were you trying to say something?
No, I totally agree with you. And I believe that one of the recommendations of the industry group is that we do ground truthing. And we support that wholeheartedly. That is all I was going to add. You know, the other thing, broadly speaking, is it will be difficult or challenging for staff to declare someone's property not developable. So, but we welcome grant routing. We'll support that.
And yeah, that is the conundrum with the whole thing of actually stating that. But because that was brought up in some discussions that I've had with them, that is, we don't want to forever banish some property owner to not being able to use their land properly. So it has to be done carefully and
Yes.
wisely. And that's why, a system should be created so that we can do that. However, okay, back to what we were talking about though, this 20% and putting it on the the supply side versus the demand side. It would be good to see how it affects the model. However, I think it's still, I maintain it is a policy point for us to maybe choose to move to that because it's more true, if it is not double counting. But we know that as population grows, we'll need more schools. And that's historic. And we can almost check that against what has been done in the past. So.
I have a follow-on question to the schools and parks number. The 20.7% that the BIA sent forward, they themselves said that that's an estimation on their part, and that they suggested that number should be vetted. If we are going to make a decision about using that number on the front end, on the supply side, my question to you is that vetting something that you would be able to do in a timely way for us to be able to consider the vetted result?
Is that directed at me?
I wasn't sure if it's
Whoever can
directed
answer
to
it.
staff.
It's to staff. I think you'd be the ones who we would need to have vet it.
Yes, but we will need the help from the school districts because there is no way for us to know what any of the school district will need. Also remember that there are some school districts that their boundaries doesn't touch the UGA. So that coordination and vetting needs to be done with the help of the school district because they will be the one telling us what they need and so forth. So I'm not sure how we can do that without input from the school district and even from parks. You will also agree that the UGA that the county is responsible for is the Vancouver UGA. We do not plan parks for Washugo, Commerce, Richfield. So we also have to ask our city partners to let us know what is out there and what are they planning for. So all those input needs to be coordinated and then present to us. I hope that is answering your question. I welcome the vetting.
Let me ask it in a slightly different way. When this comes to hearing and the council is voting on options, will we be voting on simply whether it goes into supply or demand, or on 27% for parks and schools applied to all residential land?
I will answer it this way, and I hope it's correct. The council will be directing staff on the planning assumptions we will use to run the model. You can direct us to not apply it on the supply side, but apply whatever the number is on the demand side when we size the urban growth boundary in coordination with parks and schools CFP. That may be your direction. So it's going to be up to you. Even the industry group, as I said earlier, acknowledge that this needs to be verified by looking at the capital facilities plan of the school district and parks. We can verify that by what they submit. Staff has the capability to do so, but you can direct us on whatever that number is in coordination with the school district, that should be what we should do going forward for sizing of the urban growth boundary. If you direct us to deduct it from the supply side, that's going to be your call.
But the specific percentage and number isn't,
It's
that can change even after the council votes votes for the idea, but specifies the number after the work.
That's true. The number could change. It depends on the school district's needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it would depend upon all of us looking at it, the parks, the schools, the historical information, etc. It could change and it could not. We'll just have to look at it and see.
That's correct.
Okay.
At this point, I don't know what it should be because it, as they suggested as well. Jose,
Right.
you know?
Well, there's two elements of this. If going forward, you have the option of sort of delaying that decision, but for submitting our report and doing our capacity, we're going to need a specific number to run the model pretty shortly. If not at the hearing, we're going to need specific direction on what that number should be that goes into the model. If you want to deduct that land, we're going to need a number.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
But it will be possible to do the vetting within a period of a month, won't it?
I can't answer that question. It's going to require coordination with this. If we're going to coordinate with the schools, I don't know. I would assume so, but
I would
I don't
hope that, look, we have historical information. We should be able to use what has been done in the past using ratios, etc. This is not an exact science. So I would say, yeah, we need to look at it and we need their help, maybe some input. But in the end, if you can't get it to us in a month, I think 20.7 may be the percentage we use.
One more thing, we're not dealing with we're talking about the Vancouver urban growth boundaries. We're not dealing with all the school districts. We're dealing with Vancouver and Evergreen, right?
we're doing all of them.
We're doing all of them.
Oh.
All.
So in lieu of
This
not
is the
having,
challenge.
if we don't get the capital facilities plans from the schools, all we can really do is look at assessor's data to see how much school land's been added versus houses.
Thank you, Bob. That could be done that way, but I still believe that the school district will have to play a significant role in this, whatever the number is going to be, and that because the council or because the county has already chosen a number that they're planning for from 2015 to 2035. That is the window that we are looking at. Now, going forward, there will be a new number and a new growth rate that the council will pick, and the school district will assess that to be able to say, what do they need going forward to accommodate that new growth? So there's two ways to look at it, because as I indicated earlier, the boundary that the council adopted in 2016 is fixed. And all the school districts that needed land to accommodate that growth expressed so during that process so that it could be accommodated. I used the example of Los Santos. They were the only school district that they said they need land. And we accommodated them, and we have done so in the past. From Kama School District, from Washugo School District, others, we have accommodated them and brought them into the urban growth boundary. And the reason we do that is that you want those schools, whether it's high school, elementary school, or middle school, to be served with sewer. And since, if you recall, the legislature have changed the bill now that school can site outside the urban growth boundary. I think the council should be aware of that. You approved that bill when we amended it. So there's so many ways to look at this, and all we can provide to council is clarification and based on information that we are aware of. So, but Jose is correct. At some point, for us to complete this work, the council will, your policy may be done, deducted on the supply side, apply it, whatever the number is, apply it on the demand side when you're sizing the urban growth boundary. Because until the council changes the population growth we are planning for, we are stuck with the one that we used to start to size the current urban growth boundary.
Okay, well, so we don't have a new population number?
No,
No.
the one we have is the one we use for 2015 to 2035. We will get
Oh,
another,
okay, okay.
yeah, we
All
will
right,
get
yeah,
another
okay.
number from OFM for
Okay,
going up to maybe 2045 or 2044. That will be our
okay,
next goal.
gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking something else. Okay, so what I would say is, the schools may be reluctant to weigh in too heavily on this, and the reason is because they're asking us to delay their responsibility to do a capital facilities plan because of COVID, et cetera. So I'm hoping that, if we're unable to obtain their, participation in this very heavily, that we'll be able to use some historical data to be able to create some ratios, et cetera. So.
Sure, that's okay, Councillor. That would be your call, not staff. But I will reach out to the school district. Yesterday, I was informed that Liam Bremer, who is a local attorney now, we have worked with her in the past. I'm just sharing with you. That's who the school district have now hired to represent Manny Allen. So I will reach out to her to see if there's any input she can provide me.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, does that complete this presentation then? We got, yes, okay,
Yes,
and so we have that one, all right, we have that one more thing that we're asking Bob to come up with, so hopefully we'll receive that in time prior to our June 15th hearing. Is there anything more from the council? Any further discussion, questions, comments?
I was wondering if it would be possible, Oliver, for you to let us know if the schools have responded to you in time for our next one-on-ones with Kathleen, so that if there is any issue that you're clear on where to go from there if the school district isn't going to give you the data that you're hoping for. But because that doesn't mean that we do nothing. If they give no data,
Right.
because we'll have some population data through 2035 that can be used and put into the ratio based on our historical analysis. Not too difficult. I mean, it's pretty predictable, I think, don't you? I think.
I would think so. I'll reach out to them and see if they will be able to provide me any historical information or reassessing the numbers that we are working with now to see if that has any impact on their needs. So I will reach out and if they provide me something, I will share that with the council prior to your hearing.
Thank you so much. And I'll probably be asking our county manager how that's going on Monday at our one-on-one, so that we know if you're getting the information that you're looking for from the schools, because if not, perhaps there's a way that the council could help.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you again for all of your work on this. I appreciate all the work that has been done. So,
And Chair, if I can just make sure, for the record, we do have a majority that are supportive of moving to a hearing. And I know that was Oliver's ask at the end of this meeting. So I just wanted to confirm that we can schedule the hearing.
can we schedule this hearing, council? I'm in favor.
I would say yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Mhm.
I'm actually a no because we had already voted back in April for the usage of the data that is in version 3, but I understand, go with the majority.
Well, this is just to schedule the hearing. We haven't made any decision on.
I'm
the
aware of-
model yet.
yes.
Okay.
I know, but to reconsider all 3 is something that I simply think need not be done. I think it's time to write the report that's going to go to Commerce and get it in on time. That's my perspective. So it's different.
Yeah. It is true. We did vote on that to use the input from the building industry and all of those folks that signed the letter. So, but if it needs to be done again, I guess we'll do it again.
Yeah, but just to clarify, we still have to approve that in a public hearing. So even if we agreed on a model, we still have to have a hearing in order to approve it. So
We were in a public meeting. I
Right,
think.
but we need the hearing.
We have to have a hearing, a public hearing to and Chris or Oliver chime in.
Yes, every time that the council makes changes to the model, whether it's changes to the assumptions, it is done in a public hearing, and you will hear from our city partners that have everyone who is available to come and testify before you. It has to be done in a public hearing. Yes.
The question is, what is the question being taken to the hearing? And if it's a regurgitation of what we had already voted on, that's what I am against. If it is some finessing of version 3, then that would be fine. That's what I understand that we had already supported. And I look back at those motions just to be sure. And in fact, we had already supported them. But again, I'm with you all on the majority. So I just don't happen to vote with you on this one.
Pardon me, council, for the record, Chris Cook. The choice of a model, whether solely a version 3 or solely a version 1 or pieces of this and that or adjustments or whatever, needs to be done in a resolution. And that has not previously been done. So that will need to occur, and that should occur in a public hearing where the public has the opportunity to have notice and comment.
Understood, but that isn't the point that I was attempting to make. So
I'm
it's
just
different.
Okay, moving on, we'll have a hearing on the 15th of June, at which time apparently we'll have a choice of resolutions. Or anyway, is there any new business? Doesn't appear to be. Are there counselor reports? Work session requests?
There are no work session requests this week.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are going to adjourn this meeting and go into executive session for one pending litigation for 10 minutes. We've been sent that connection, so I will see you on the other side. And there will be an attorney present.
And potential action.
Oh, and potential action. All
Yes,
right.
I'll keep this WebEx open.
Okay, we will keep it open then. Thank you. Please. All right, we're back in council time, and I believe we have a motion.
Madam Chair, I move to approve, I move to approve the proposed settlement and release agreement relating to the lawsuit filed by Katrina Summers on July 2nd, 2019, and authorize the county manager to sign the agreement on behalf of the county.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to allow the county manager to sign the settlement. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. That concludes our business for the day. We are adjourned.